We are spending some time with the 15th verse of the spiritual will of Tobit that says, "Do not drink wine to excess, and do not let drunkenness go along on your way." In other words, do not become drunk, and do not keep company with a man who drinks to get drunk. We stated earlier that drugs are another source of intoxication besides alcohol and cigarette smoking. We promised to make a few comments about this evil which has spread worldwide. Drug trafficking presents a serious dilemma, much more serious when this traffic enters the junior high school and high school grounds. Our teenagers today experiment and use a number of different drugs. We will not try to exhaust this subject, nor will we get involved with statistics since this information is readily available. About the destructiveness of drug abuse and drug addiction, we are all well informed from the media. We often hear the term OD, which stands for overdose. Several years ago, one of the most prominent and talented college basketball stars OD'd. His death shocked the nation. He collapsed after a basketball game, I believe, and his heart did not only stop. The picture showed that it actually burst from a crack cocaine overdose. The question is, once again, since everyone knows that drugs kill, drugs destroy a person psychosomatically, drugs ruin lives, why do we have this widespread abuse? You'd think, after all the money spent on drug awareness, all the years of statistical evidence, people should be convinced and this malpractice should come to a halt. On the contrary, drug abuse is on a rise among teenagers in many different parts of the world, including Greece. We must ask over and over again, why? This is the puzzle that we must solve here. This is of great interest to us, and this is what we will attempt to address. This is the key issue and the only one that we will deal with. Again, it is a matter of faith. Faith in the everyday things. The Lord said in the 3rd chapter of John in his conversation with Nicodemus, when Nicodemus asked him, "How can this be? How can someone be reborn from above?" The Lord said, "I have spoken to you earthly things, and you do not believe. How then will you believe if I speak of heavenly things?" This is the 3rd time we are using this verse. We mentioned it. It's over and over again. We stated this in the subject of alcohol and cigarette smoking. We cannot stress this enough that it is a matter of faith. My young friend, my son, my daughter, do not go to that place. Do not hang around shopping malls alone. Nothing good will come from there. If you don't believe this, you will not want to take heed. Hangouts will introduce you to all these things. You must believe it in the depth of your heart. How much must you believe this? Believe it enough not to need proof, not to need to experiment. You certainly do not need any proof for the law of gravity. You have complete faith in the law of gravity. You are not going to experiment with this law by jumping from the roof of a 10-story building. You have faith in this law. We need to apply this faith in the area of drugs, alcohol, and cigarettes. We all have seen the end results of drug and alcohol addicts. During the last talk, we brought up the fable of the fox and the king of the animals, the lion. the fox outsmarted the lion. Unfortunately, people that experiment with drugs behave like flies in the summer. They see hundreds of their peers stuck on the fly trap. They cannot get away, and yet new flies approach the fly trap and they get stuck as well. And with flies, this is understandable. They have no intellect. They have no logic. But a human being has a brain. A person can use his brain to think. And think we must. Think about your two teenage schoolmates who were shot in cold blood at the Lehigh campus by their teenage drug dealer because they owed him $300. Your friend's oldest brother was beheaded in an automobile accident involving a drunk driver. Why couldn't all this happen to you? What is the only guarantee that these things will not happen to you if you choose to stay away from these substances? No. It is not enough to try to stay away from these substances, but we need to stay away from the environment and the people and the friends that talk about these substances and these things. Unfortunately, because of egotism and lack of this faith that we brought up time after time, people think these things happen to someone else. This couldn't possibly happen to me. Father Athanasius Mytilineos, the brain and the guide of my voice, and we should all take time to thank God 1,000 times for him and pray that he grants him many years to supply us with another 5,000 cassette hours of teachings. Father Athanasius says that in his 40 years as a confessor, he has heard and seen everything under the sun. Unspeakable things, unutterable things, terrible sins, strange things. He reminds himself, people with flesh and blood have done these things. People like me. I am no different. I'm a human being. I'm not an angel. Why couldn't I do some of these awful things as well? They managed to do these certain things, and so can I. Who thinks like this? Our Father Athanasius. Only when we have this most basic humility, the humility that informs us that these things can happen to us, only then we will be watchful and something else. Only then God will protect us. God, who loves the humble, will protect us. Otherwise, if we are possessed by the everyday arrogance and pride and invincibility which characterizes today's secular teenager, then we will join the ranks of the victims. We will become an addition to these negative statistics. Certainly, there are other reasons of drug trafficking, such as the copycat syndrome, especially among teenagers. Curiosity is also a great factor, and young people are often curious for new experiences to experience something new. Another factor of drug use is ignorance, and that might not be the case here in this country, probably more so in other countries, where people may not be informed very well as of the consequences of addiction and the bondage that results from this type of addiction. Another reason for drug involvement is bad company, the bad company that a person may keep. My friends are doing it. We are having a lot of fun together. Let me give it a try. And since I am part of this crowd, and after all, everyone else is doing it, I might as well give it a try as well. Again, all these different factors help in the promotion of drug abuse, but the true reason goes much deeper, and we must pay very close attention to this, because once we discover the real reason, then we will also discover the cure. It has to do with our very existence, questioning the purpose of our existence. When a young person is going through a time of spiritual crisis, then he's very vulnerable and in danger of using drugs. The contemporary men, especially the young man or woman, the young man or the young woman of today has a void, an empty soul. Immediately after they killed and expelled God from his heart. The Big Bang theories, evolution, and a number of unscientific theories have perplexed the teenager's mind. We said unscientific because true science does not rebel against God. Science does not separate itself from religion because they both happen to enjoy a common origin. True science, being the study of nature, originates from God, much like true religion. Today's pseudoscience has rebelled against God and against men. Only a false science will teach false theories, poisoning and corrupting the minds of the students, and a demonic science will invent destruction of life by nuclear weapons. The men of pseudoscience rebelled against God, and now he points his weapon against himself. Science today is in the hands of dark political powers, serving their various expeditions and agendas. The pseudoscience produces various drugs, chemical substances for well-known reasons. Years ago, the great British Empire in its China expedition promoted the spread of some narcotic substance to keep the Chinese people in check. Today, the Chinese government seeks the death penalty for drug users in China. However, they cultivate certain drug plants and they send them to England. This is how God punishes. As we were saying, these darkened minds took care to kill the existence of God in the soul and heart of the people, especially the youth. The man of today, generally speaking, has lost his existential orientation. He has lost the purpose of life. Why do I exist? And this question cannot be answered by science or philosophy, but only God can answer this type of question. People today have lost this orientation of their existence. They are disoriented, and they have no clue. It has been going on for years. It helps. But how many people today try drugs because of plain ignorance? We must admit very few in this country. We have been talking about awareness for decades. Billboards, newspapers, television, advertisements, politicians, everyone talks about drug awareness and saying no to drugs. And we recently have AIDS awareness, but the solution cannot be found in awareness alone. Awareness is the beginning of the solution. It is extremely important to know, to be aware of a problem. But this knowledge is not enough. To properly defend someone against drugs and against contracting the HIV virus, awareness will help somewhat. But the solution is a matter of spiritual awareness and spiritual foundation. Have you seen a mature, orthodox, spiritual person living the sacramental life of the church? Have you seen a person like that end up using drugs? We're not talking here about people who serve in the altar, because we often hear this statement. After some of our young people get to college and they never set foot in church, we often hear, their mothers usually and grandmothers, they're telling us, boy, they grew up in the altar. They were such good kids. They were always in Sunday school. What went wrong? Well, we can't say for sure, but even though They went through the motions. A spiritual foundation was lacking. The altar is a great start, but without a spiritual father, Holy Confession a number of times per year, Holy Communion, teaching of the Word of God, prayer life, and most importantly, a Christian life within the home. Without all these practices, we cannot talk about spirituality. A person that lives his spiritual life, a young person that practices his or her faith, as we described above, will never have to deal with any type of drugs. We have never seen such a person of orthodox spirituality needing to use drugs. Of course, anyone who decides to leave God, to kill God inside of them, and take the road and the way of the world, then this is possible. Please do not be confused from the experience of some drug addicts who have a born-again experience at the prison or at the rehabilitation center, and they become religious for a time. They are preaching and giving testimonies only to end up in prison time after time. I met a young man back in the 1990, and he was extremely interested in our faith, and I made a sincere effort to introduce him to our Orthodox Church. However, he was infected by the heresy of the Pentecostals, and it's the same young man who has been teaching and preaching that Christ would come back to rapture the Pentecostals in 1995. And several years ago, I asked him, I said, well, it's 1995. Now what? Well, this poor young man has been in prison almost every year since 1990. He comes out full of the Spirit, reborn, up until the minute depression sets in, and then he will sell his children's television set to buy cocaine. This is a very, very sad situation. We need to be careful. Not all spirituality will give us the proper foundation, and this is why we are careful to stress Orthodox spirituality. The spirituality of the Eastern Orthodox Church of the 7 ecumenical councils. So a strong spiritual foundation is needed today, and today more than ever we must help our young people to find God again. We are encouraged to see a great deal of young people that are turning to God, and they are being saved from these evils. They found God. But is it necessary to lose God first? Why must we lose God first? And if we lose God, do we have a guarantee that we will find Him again? And do you think that a person that used drugs, tried drugs, even once, is the same as the person that never tried drugs, not even once? There is a great difference in these people. There's a substantial difference. We talked about the indelible memory that these substances imprint on the brain. So we do not have a guarantee that this memory will not be triggered by different circumstances many years later. We know that rehabilitation produces some results. Many people become well and live normal lives, but many people do not. Many people quit smoking, but many of them start again 3, 5, 10 years later. If we have this sort of triggering in cigarette smoking, which is much milder, then we can imagine the strength of this triggering in the area of strong narcotics. So today's man must search and find God. He must hunger and thirst for God. And all of you who are here, who come to these studies, and those that are listening to the tapes, you all love God and you are eager and thirsty for Him. And inside of you, there's a strong desire to have communion, to be with Him. Unfortunately, many people today, like the prodigal son, are being fed by carob pods or xylokerata, as we say in Greek, food for pigs. The prodigal son was feeding on these, which was a substitute for the good food that he gave up in his father's house. He was dying from hunger, and one day he thought to himself, I will return to my father. And he put his plan in action. He returned to his father consciously. He felt it in his heart this time. He realized the importance of staying close to the father. He did not feel this before he left, and this brought ruin and unhappiness in his life. Happy will be the person, and all of us, of course, if we realize ahead of time that we must not leave from the house of our God the Father. Unfortunately, who's going to convince our Goyans today and all the youth that the emptiness and the dissatisfaction of their soul is due to the absence of God? They will scream and shout and rebel. You're wrong. They will tell you that you don't know anything. So they're constantly looking for money to keep up with the fashion of their school friends, to be in. Some of them will steal money. Or once they get older, they'll want to run from party to party and from mall to mall, or from a movie theater to movie theater. And they certainly don't want to hear that all this will not put out the thirst and the dissatisfaction of their soul. This thirst is metaphysical, and to try to put it out by the means of MTV and the like is like drinking ocean water. And when you do this, you become thirstier and thirstier. They believe that if they could only be rich, to buy more things, to enter more shopping malls, to travel and live it up, they would find joy and satisfaction of the soul. Father Athanasius relates about a young man who visited him very recently, and he seemed to be depressed. He sensed that this was not the type of depression that people normally have and run to psychiatrists. For this young man was feeling some sort of a disgust for the life of the world, the life of the flesh. In Romans 8:6, we read, "For to be carnally minded is death." This young person found his way because he realized the very thing that was missing from his life. And this misery that he felt was the beginning of his return. Sometimes when we eat something that doesn't agree with us, we feel horrible, and we do not feel better until we actually vomit. This is not my example. It is also scriptural. My dear brothers, man was very happy in paradise because he had complete communion with God. When he was exiled, he quickly attempted to fix some makeshift to substitute, to make up for this great loss. These superficial forms of paradise vary. And one of these man-made forms of paradise is the high that is promised by the use of narcotics. Drug dealers promise a high by the help of the devil, and they deliver this high. But you pay a very high price. To buy the drug, you pay a high price for your health, a higher price when your children are born deformed, and the highest price of all is the loss of the soul. Someone who owed these sacrifices himself to the devil. These are the highs of drug users. Those that have experienced the misery and the agony and the withdrawal symptoms from some of these drugs, they no longer talk about fun and paradise, but true hell. These drugs introduce people to a living hell. Drugs today are circulating just about everywhere and in all classes of people. They do quite well in school grounds and surprisingly enough in suburban schools as well. You don't need to search very far to find them. They will most likely find you. They will find you, or you will find them at the nightclubs or the bars, at certain parties, at mall arcades, and especially at rock concerts, where massive quantities are being sold by the merchants of death. We could describe all these places by a verse in Proverbs 7:27, paths of Hades leading to the chambers of death. Hades and death is lurking behind all these places, and spiritual young people have no business hanging around these places. Our young people from the junior high school years want to window shop at the mall, meet some school friends, have a soda, and walk around or make a day of it and catch a movie at the mall. If you must go to the mall, you can go with your parents or your relatives or your spiritual brothers and sisters if they're of age. Unfortunately, most teenagers today do not even want to be seen with their parents around these places, let alone go there with them. St. Peter talks about those who keep company with falsehood. And this false company, this bad company, will lead you towards the life of falsehood or towards the paths of Hades, leading to the chambers of death. St. Peter, in his second epistle, also says, for a man is a slave to whatever has mastered him. Alcohol, cigarette smoking, and narcotics become harsh masters over people's lives. But the bondage and the dependency that takes place from certain drugs like heroin or cocaine goes beyond measure. And drug addicts are some of the most pitiful people in society. May God have mercy on them and all of us. We cannot be talking about cure in the area of drugs. The only cure is abstention. We can never cure an alcohol or a drug addict. There is no cure. We can talk about rehabilitation, but never cure. The memory of the drug or alcohol or nicotine is never erased from the brain, and the desire can be triggered at any time, even years later, as we stated earlier. Outside of existential reasons, people using drugs to add some meaning to their otherwise purposeless life, some people use drugs and alcohol as coping mechanisms to cope with their insecurities. They're afraid to take some of their challenges head on, so they feel that this or that drug will give them the extra edge or the confidence that they may lack.